Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. It is our pleasure to greet you once again from the sanctuary at Olive Grove Baptist Church at 1034 Albert Avenue in Norfolk, Virginia, as we gather every Wednesday at 7, as we do on every Sunday at 11, by way of YouTube and Facebook, so that we can share together the goodness of our God and King. As we begin our inquiry into the Word of God tonight, please bow your head with me in prayer. Gracious Father, we are indeed in awe and gratitude as we perceive your presence surrounding us. And we thank you for your grace and for your mercy and for the privilege that allows us to call ourselves your servants. Breathe on us as we ask you to illuminate your word, that we might understand more about what it is you call us to be and to become. Through Christ our Savior and Lord, we pray. Amen. Now, here we are tonight in the Gospel of Matthew in the 14th chapter, where Jesus is emerging from a picture where he does much teaching to a place where he is in the midst of a series of miracles, and we're going to look at a miracle beginning at we'll begin at the 14th verse. I think is it the 14th or 13th verse in the gospel. I forgot which one I told Mary we would use. We're going to look at that for a minute, and then we're going to work our way through. Thank you for coming. Okay. We're ready for the first verse, Mary? All right. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." They must have been in Florida. Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. All right. I have a question as we typically begin. What is the meaning of the word compassion in your thinking? What does it mean to hold compassion? Anybody compassionate? Have you ever been compassionate? Share in suffering? That would mean if as the writer communicates this description of Jesus, that Jesus was not only willing to observe the pain of the people around him, observe people in their circumstances, but he was able, maybe uniquely qualified, to share in their suffering. Yes, Deacon Stokely.
I would say it's a feeling of caring, caring enough for others to help them. And I mean, at that time, because his compassion was so great, so he got to be mostly caring.
If I ask you about 3 of the most troubling plagues in our time, good health, or access to health care, access to food so that we're not hungry, and relief from poverty. would you say that these are rights or privileges? Access to health care, access to food, access to relief from poverty. Rights or privileges? Rights.
I would say privileges.
Privileges.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, ma'am. If I ask you to talk about hunger, access to health care, access to food, access to health care, and access to a way out of poverty, would you say that these are things to which people have rights, or are these privileges?
I do feel that humans have a right to have food.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a privilege to have food.
Okay.
I don't see having food as a privilege. I see privilege is something that's not a necessity. Privilege is not necessarily privilege is something that you could live without, but you can't live without food. That's a need, and those that you have to have food. We're not talking about whether it's a steak or a hamburger. The privilege is the steak. The hamburger.
I thought you would have said a veggie burger. Since you don't eat meat, you don't even.
Well, I have all these meat eaters around here.
So you
They wouldn't relate.
feeling put out, surrounded by these carnivores,
Yeah,
omnivores. Yes, Mary.
I don't even associate need with a right, because we need a lot of things, but you can't compel people to give them to you. If you could enforce, I have an obligation that can be enforced through civil law or some other means, then it's a right. You must do it. But a need is one that doesn't have to get met.
And then not only that, everybody don't have life insurance. And everybody don't have food all the time like they want. They may have some kind of food. And poverty, sometimes you stuck in a place where you can come out of it in the meantime.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I say that statement you just made is a catch-22, because we all have rights to do what is right and to, I can't remember exactly the statement that you made, but I feel it was a catch-22. We do things that we feel like is right, but other people don't feel like it's right to do what you say.
Well, I don't mean right in terms of correct or appropriate. I mean a right as in a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
Whose microphone is that?
I don't know, but what you just said is so abstract, unmeasurable, and it's no way to hold accountable. If you were in the Middle East at a certain time and you didn't have that food and that housing for the traveler by night, you could be accountable to what? Social ostracism? You wouldn't go to jail, you wouldn't get fined, you wouldn't. And that was people considered a right and a responsibility. But you didn't have to do it, you just should do it.
Well, they didn't all feel it was a responsibility or right, because when Jesus asked about, when the disciples actually were the first to bring it up, they said, it's getting late, so we need to send these people home or somewhere, send them to the villages. That's why I say they were in Florida. I didn't get a bump to that. The villages in Florida. So he said, send them to the villages so that they can buy their own food. They can take care of themselves. But the perspective that Jesus shows is much more like the perspective that Mary just shared when she talked about a sense of obligation to a stranger, to someone who's hungry, to someone who's a traveler, to someone in your neighborhood. So the disciples consider what they have, or whatever they had, you would assume that people so accustomed to traveling as they would have had at least enough food for themselves to eat. I mean, they were on the road all the time. They were on the road like Willie Nelson. So here they are in the middle of nowhere. They've come from some hard work, and they're in a time when they are interested in rest and recovery. Apparently, it was a long day. People brought their sick to Jesus, and he healed their sick. That's what the text says. He healed their sick. That's why I ask you the question about their right to good health, their right to health care. And the disciples, they didn't seem to have a problem with him healing the sick, but they had some different concerns when they were hungry. I mean, healing the sick, he did all the work himself. So their job, no doubt, was to usher the crowd, or to manage the crowd, who gets next, and which and in what order, and that. So no doubt they had work to do, and I could see where they'd all be tired if they had been doing that all day long, as Mary says, in the heat of the day. So he healed them. He didn't send them to the hospital. He didn't send them to some other place. He didn't do something different. The text is pretty hyperbolic, because it suggests that he healed all the sick that they brought to him. Hey, Sandy, healed all the sick that they brought to him. And so I ask you the question about the right to access to health care and good health, because here we are in the 21st century. One of the continuing arguments about us, among us, is whether access to health care is a right or a privilege. Is it a concern that the government should take up? Is it a concern that only individuals should take up? And is it a matter of concern and interest in the body of Christ? Yes, ma'am. You on? I think you just turned it off.
Brings it completely back to your original question.
Of course it does.
Because
I planned it that way.
to define compassion, you have to know if it's a right or a privilege. Because if I feel it's a privilege, I'm not going to have compassion for you. But if I feel that it's a right, people should have health care. People should, if they're sick, they should have medical care available to them. And my heart will lead me to try to action, to do something about it. Or if I feel that they should, you see homeless people, they should have something to eat. How are you going to drive up and go and eat somewhere?
Steak.
Yeah, that steak, and you just left somebody,
veggie burger.
past somebody. So that's, the two are so intertwined.
It might help us to I got you, Mary. It might help us to come to a place where I ask you the question, have you ever felt compassion? The prefix com suggests with, and passion is feeling. So with feeling, not only feeling for the self or the idea, but with feeling for the other, feelings for other people. And so I get in your suffering with you. That's why Brett said an ability to feel for another person, to feel with another person. And so Gladys drives around in her car with some packets of snacks and water and directions to Olive Grove in her car. And so when she pulls up to the traffic light and somebody comes and says they're hungry, she doesn't give them nothing. She gives them these little bags because she knew she was going to run into somebody that day who needed some nabs and nuts and whatever else you put in your bags and some water. And more than once we've talked about the people who have begun to eat what she gives them before she drives off. And so she sees them in their hunger, and she responds to that with the same kind of thinking that she just said. Everybody needs food, and we have, if we are who we claim to be, maybe we are moved with compassion the way the text says Jesus was moved with compassion. He didn't see them hungry and say how sad, or he didn't do what his men wanted to do. Send them jokers away. It's too many of them. We can't feed that many people. That take all the money we got and more to feed them. So they said, send them away. And a compassionate Christ said, no, you feed them. Yes, Mary.
See, I was struggling when you said government, because we're supposed to be nation after God, and you would think we're so powerful and plentiful that
Raise your mic a little bit, baby.
that we could share more.
Uh-huh.
We don't. I don't know that our hearts are following God, or we would be compelled. We have welfare in some things, and then the same thing happens in the church. We got the missions ministry and somebody else to do it. I think one of the key things is Jesus told them to go feed them. They didn't know they had the power and obligation to do what he did. And if we keep waiting on someone else instead of acting like Gladys, we will never be the church.
Okay. I agree with that. That's why I challenge you with a question about your own sense of compassion, whether you see yourself as a compassionate Christian after the fashion of a compassionate Christ. And if you give yourself a test, and I won't give you a test, you can answer the question for yourself the way I think Jesus challenges his disciples to with this illustration. It's a sermon that's in action. It's not just words. He did a lot of teaching, but this is a whole different kind of lesson right here, and it's a challenge for us when we consider the fact that there are as many hungry people as there are in the world now, as many hungry people as there are in the country now, as many hungry people as there are in the city now, as many people who struggle, who contend for good health, who don't have access to health care, who can't afford to buy their medicine, who can't afford to buy food. You can go to church if you can wait for the right day and get food, but we hand out food one day a week, not every day, but there are hungry people every day. And so what is it, Compassionate Wednesday? Or are we compassionate Christians? And what's the evidence? Where do we come alongside somebody who's poor or homeless or hungry or sick? And what do we do to change their circumstances? If we follow this example, he said he healed all the sick that they brought to him. That suggests to me that when Jesus sees people suffering, it moves him not just to say something, but it moves him to do something. Matthew chapter 14, starting at verse 14. Yeah, he does not simply observe their situation. He had compassion on them and healed the sick who were among them. Now, we are the body of Christ. You would think that the language that describes his compassion would fit us well, so that we find ourselves among the sick, among the hungry, among the poor. Not doing what we can't do, but certainly doing what we can. That would be a mark of compassion. Mary talked about our missions ministry and the thing that those 25, 30 people do. They are not our proxies in missionary work. We contribute to the work that they do financially. We give some money to enable them to do some of the things that they do. We bring in food from the food pantry, and often, sadly, when they go through the food that people bring, they have to take out the food that with expired dates, because people tend to give not from their first and best, but they give from cleaning out the cabinets. These beans have been in here long enough. The beans have turned to seed again. So it's possible to make it look good, but it's not always as good as it looks. And you know the truth about your position when it comes to access to health and health care, the ability to purchase medications, and you know, I've been nursing a bad shoulder for 8-10 months, and I want to thank you for the wonderful health care insurance that you have given to me with your tax dollars, from a military retirement to being over 65, and having access to health care, so I can get. When I need medicine, I don't really have to pay for it if I don't mind waiting in line when I go to Langley or Eustis to get it. But not a lot of people can do that. And so the Lord has blessed me in that regard, and you have been instruments in God's hands as you have been faithful in paying your taxes to allow these things to be done for me, and I just want to thank you. So when I see someone who can't go to the doctor, or who can't pay for their medicine, or who have to choose between paying for their medicine and paying for their meals, there is in me an urge to respond. And when I heed the urge, respond to the urge, I think I've learned the lesson of compassion from a compassionate Christ. When I fail to, then this hasn't helped me at all. So, and that's why I offer you that challenge about access to health care, access to good food, and the ability to extricate yourself, to get out of poverty, so that there's enough of the things that you need in order to maintain a healthy life and a healthy existence. And so when there's debate in the courts about affordable health care, where do you come down? Do you end up saying that affordable health care is a right, or is it a privilege? And how do you deal with yourself when it comes to coming to your conclusion? Yes, ma'am.
And when you know someone that died because they did not have health care, it brings you to a place to understand having health care is a privilege because everyone should have a right to live and not die because they couldn't afford the health care. They sit in emergency room. An emergency room policy is that we will serve you, but you can sit there 5 or 6 hours regardless of your condition, but we will serve you. But the paying people, the people that have health care, when they come in, we're going to scan their health insurance, and they kind of jump ahead of you, and you're sitting there because you don't have the coverage. So it is a privilege for us to have certain things that we tend to take for granted.
Yeah, lots of people take those for granted. You've heard me with this example 2 different times. I had two of my brothers had the same heart condition at about the same time. One was the director of continuing education at Mississippi Valley State University in Itta Bena. The other was retired from working for Newsday thing. The one who retired with very little money, and because he didn't earn much money in his life in the last years of his employment, his Social Security payment was small, and he was swindled out of his 401k. He lived with me for years. The one in Mississippi had a heart attack, and he had quadruple bypass surgery. The one in New Jersey, where we lived at the time, who didn't have state insurance, had what do you call when they put the balloon thing in your heart? What do you call that? Angioplasty. Yeah. One had a $100,000 operation, and the other had a $25,000 operation because he had great health insurance. To make the point that Gladys makes. Now, make the condition less dire than a bad heart. Maybe some chronic thing that plagues a patient or plagues a person, and because they don't have good health care, they just live with it and they go with it. Or if they go to the doctor, maybe they can't buy the medicine, or if they go to the medicine, got to make a decision between a meal or medication. And when Jesus looked at these people who were sick, the inference is that he healed all of the people who were sick. And that's like him, to heal them all. And when the disciples were ready to say, okay, we've done enough today, send these people home so they can get themselves something to eat. And a compassionate Christ looks at them and at us, and he says to us 2,000 years in the future, you feed them. And so we get this assignment. He has challenged us to do something that it seems to us too hard to do. Feed all of these people. There are more than 5,000 of them. But most of us lack the sense of spiritual maturity that would enable us to see the world in the 21st century hungry and homeless and sickly, so that we would find it necessary for us to respond. Piaget says that we begin our lives at birth, and for the next 2 years, we feel our way through, learning tactile skills, learning to distinguish between the self and the other, and finally getting the hang of it. That we give them, in preschool, we give them manipulatives, we call them, little little toys or tiny objects that they can learn sensory things. They put them in their mouths. And we have to teach them not to put them in their mouths, and they feel them, and they bang them on things, and they do the things that children do with things that enable them to learn how to engage the world, how to tell the difference between themselves and something else. And after that time, they get to a place where Piaget calls it a pre-operational stage, and at that stage, they learn some concrete ideas. They can distinguish some minor, simple concepts, but they're not really at a mature level. They are maturing, and so for the time between 2 and 7, they're figuring that out. And then there's another stage following that between 7 and 11, where they learn some more operational concepts, and they begin to get the hang of some abstract thinking, and they can form an idea. And then after that, after they're 12, then they become more mature, and they become reasonably fully operational as people. And they've been people the whole time, but they have grown from an infant that didn't understand much to a mature person that understands concepts more. Concepts is a good word. More conceptually, more philosophically, more. They're no longer thinking so concretely. They're thinking more abstractly, and they can form ideas, and their imaginations change. They can create things, and I think the same kind of journey from infancy to maturity describes the life of a Christian. I think we early on we associate with our parents in the best situations as the ones who provide for everything we need, and we learn to distinguish between us and them, and we learn to distinguish among each other, and as we grow, we call it an age of accountability in most Baptist churches, where people come to a point where they can articulate what it means to become a Christian, what it means to understand that Christ died and rose for us in our salvation. And we ask them questions that say that they get that. And it's the floor. It's where they join the Christian family. It's where they get on board. But it's not, in the best case, the last stop, because at that stage their thinking is still so concrete. They can tell Bible stories and can read Bible stories, but they can't take the Bible out of the book, so that they can't wonder about what is Jesus trying to say when he tells these people, you feed them. And so he takes them, and he's taking us to a much more abstract place when we have to decide whether we are responsible for people who need food to eat, who need to be in good health. And so he challenges them to start where they are and to use what they have. You can't use what you don't have. But you can use everything you do have. So he doesn't ask them, and he does not ask us to do what we can't do, to use what we don't have. But he does challenge us the way Andrew comes forward with this little boy's lunch. And he gives, and they put the lunch into the Lord's hands. And so if you start where you are and start with what you have, if you do the right thing with it, put it in his hands, then the work can be done. The other way to do that is to do what the disciples said, and it's too much. There are too many of them. I've got $10. So why throw? So we used to use that logic sometimes when it came to a response to people who made applications to us for financial assistance. Sometimes they needed thousands of dollars, and if they needed more money than we could give them, the question was, does it make sense for us to take this amount of money? It won't help these people with their circumstance. Or does it, and so that they can try to hustle the rest someplace else? There used to be people, Brett, around here who would, we got to know them. They'd go around to the churches. And lots of the churches, that's how we got to know each other, because they'd make their rounds for churches, seeing what they could get from churches. So we have to decide, do I give them $100 because that's what I can do? There's one church in town that no matter what the person comes in, and no matter what they ask for, what they're going to get is $50, whether it'll help them or not. Now, if I had $50, I could probably find something for it to do. But the question is not that you agonize over what you don't have, but you take what you do have and do the right thing with it. Reverend, you seem so far. You all right? You are? Okay. Jump right in. I'm used to you talking a lot. Yeah. Say what? No, I was talking to this Reverend. I got 3 reverends out there. 1, 2, 3 reverends. But I'm talking about this Reverend, my namesake Reverend. Yeah. So I'm almost preaching. Start with what you have and give it to him and see what he can do with it. Because there's so much that he can do that we can hardly imagine. And maybe we cannot imagine what he can do with what we put into his hands. Yes, ma'am.
And doesn't that speak to where our faith is? The statement that if you start with what you have, and you start with what you have and believe, just do it, and it will grow, just like the fish. You know, where the disciples was looking at it, it's just 5. It's just all this multitude of people, and it's just 5 fish here.
2 fish.
2
and 5.
And 5 biscuits.
5, 2 fish, 5 loaves. Okay. So
I know what you're talking about. All I have to do is go back and read it. I know who's right.
Okay.
If that matters. Yeah, but
So
the principle is, I
it's
get you.
the faith. Is believing that what you have will stretch and walking in it, and not looking at the number.
Yeah. He can't use it if you don't give it to him. But if you give it to him, he can use it. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sitting here still amazed with Gladys's idea, trying to figure out what I'm going to put in my bag. And it reminds me that I didn't see it. I didn't see the possibility of how far a little bag of, you get a bag of a whole bunch of stuff, you can make a lot of them pouches. It's not $10. It's more than $10.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded, a city girl can't think like a country girl and vice versa. So maybe we need to indoctrinate some more of that old school teaching and training like they used to do for missionaries and evangelists. Because some people just can't see. These poor guys never imagined that they could just hold that bread and pray and it would spread.
No, of course they didn't. Of course they didn't. And the guy on Gladys's corner with his cardboard say he's worn out that sign. He's got different messages on either side of the sign. And he's got different signs for different corners, and he's plotted out different places and different days to be in different places. But she's always prepared for them, and never has to talk herself out of feeling guilty because she looked the other way. Now, most people have become hardened enough so that they don't beat themselves up for looking the other way. But Gladys, instead of walking away full and leaving them empty, does what Jesus did, does what Paul and Silas did. I don't have any money, but I got these nabs and a bottle of water. I've got some what other kind of thing you put in that little bag? Yeah, trail mix. Yeah, put that in there. Stuff that'll, of course you expect a nutritionist to put healthy stuff in the bag, so they eat that healthy in their lives. So she won't give now. Belle will give them some M&Ms or some Snickers, but Gladys not gonna give you anything that's gonna hurt your teeth, because she wants to take responsibility for your whole person. But instead, as Mary says, of doing nothing, we do something. Don't do what you can't. Don't do nothing because nothing seems like little to you, but do what you can. Amen. And so he gives it. They get the little boy's lunch, and they give the lunch to Jesus. And then he says, what? Make all the people sit down. Now, the images that we see where food is being handed out so many places in the world, there's a clamoring, everybody pushing, trying to get to the front of the line. Everybody trying to get next to the truck. Everybody wants to get the next handout because they are hungry. That's why I try never to say that I'm starving, no matter how hungry I am, because I don't really know what it's like to be starving. I know what it's like to be really hungry. My brother used to say, hungry enough to bite a hook. But he tells them to organize. Make all the people, to take King James says, make the men sit down. So make all the people sit down. And after they sit down, he does what he can do, but they cannot. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. That's why I've learned not to say, my blessing. It's not my blessing. It's not, first of all, when somebody asks me and they do at church a lot, they say, Pastor, will you bless the food? I say, nah, you don't want me to bless it. You want me to ask the Lord to bless it. I'll do that. And I've told you before that to ask that the food would be good enough to eat, that it won't hurt anybody, that's downright superstitious, because I'm not asking God to purify the food and make it safe to eat. I'm expressing my gratitude to God that I have, or that we have something to eat. And so he does not say in that text, put it back up, Mary. He took the bread and he looked up to heaven and he gave thanks. He expressed his gratitude to the Father for the fact that there was that provision. And then he began in the next verse, gave them to the disciples, the pieces, and the disciples gave them to the people who were sitting. Now, we have a small fellowship hall, and sometimes we've tried to put as many as 100 or 120 people in that space for food to eat. And I'm going to tell you that even when we leave the sanctuary, the line can become a little rowdy because everybody wants to be next. And we would do it for funerals. We say, please let the immediate family go first. And then everybody is in the immediate family, everybody trying to be first. But he shares this with them in a way that is calm and under control. So he shares the food with the disciples. The disciples don't eat first. He shares the food with the disciples. He gives the food to the disciples, and the disciples give it to the people, 5,000 of them or more. And so when we take what we have and give it to him and do what he says, he has a way of doing with what we have given to him more than we could do with it ourselves. They couldn't imagine, Mary says, they couldn't imagine making this meager fare enough to feed all these people, because they have not really come to appreciate. Now they've seen him work some miracles, but this is a miracle he's never worked before, and so they limit him to the things that they have seen him do, which is a mistake, to limit God based on my perception of what can be done. That's the definition of impossible. He does things that can't be done. And he uses people to get the things done. And so, when I can't do it because I don't have it, but it's in me to get it done, then I give him me. And he strengthens me to do what otherwise I cannot. And when it was all over, they had little styrofoam packets, little white styrofoam packets, and aluminum foil to wrap up and take some home to Mama and them. They had leftovers. They had 12 baskets left over. So that when we give him what we have, and he does with it what only he can do, he puts us in position where there's enough to go around, and he never runs out. So when I give him myself, and I feel like I have given out, he has a way of replenishing the store so that Gladys calls it go some more, so I can go some more. If I give it to him and do what he says. Yes, Mary?
I'm still stuck on that verse where he told them to go feed them, and they couldn't believe that he had given them the power. And they could have been believing just because he said it. He told you to go do it, but you don't believe you can. And I think that's the mindset we get stuck in, where he said stuff, and if we have ears to hear, we get stuck in doubt range and can't move.
Yeah. Well, the challenge, of course, is to figure it out to the disciples. They said, man, what you talking about? This can't be done. And our tendency is to begin with what we have and decide whether we can get all the way with what we have. And often to say, never mind, because we can't imagine the it in his hands. So it is, I don't remember whether it was Mary or Gladys, who talked about this in terms of faith, our faith going to work, our faith in action. So there's a James Cleveland in that Lord help me to hold out song. My way may not be easy. You didn't say it would be. And so the things that we are challenged to do are often not easy things to do. Amen. But that does not relieve us of the responsibility to become like the compassionate Christ, who sees sickness and heals, who sees hunger and feeds, who sees loneliness and despair and befriends, who does for people things that seem impossible for people to do. In the Gospel of John, he talks to his disciples about the work that they must do, and he says they marveled at his, as to use a Gladys word, at the miracles of the Master. And Jesus said to them, I think it's in the 14th chapter, and greater works than these will you do, because I go to my Father. And you would think that what he would do next is walk on water, or change water to wine, or feed a multitude. Instead, what he does, he takes off his shirt and he wraps it around his waist, and he dresses like a slave would dress, a servant would dress, and then he washes their feet. Not one of the wows, because of what it looked like to us or to them, but a wow that he would become so humble after talking about greater works. So in this story, I see a demonstration of compassion doing what compassion does. He felt sorry for them, probably, but it was deeper than just feeling sorry for them. He got in their stuff with them, like he gets in our stuff with us. He doesn't just send us off to do what needs to be done without him, but he joins us and he invites us. And some of you heard me say this before. When Jesus says, "Follow me," he's not saying, "Go where I went." He's saying, "Do what I did." Help, heal, comfort, befriend. That's what he did. And not to degrees that you can't, but to degrees that you can. And act like you believe that he was telling the truth when he said, "I will be with you always." Because his continuing presence is always with us, Paul finds himself saying, "I can do anything. Christ gives me strength." So you look at the health crisis in this country in particular right now, and you look at all of the people. You know, we probably feed 40 families an average week from our food pantry, and but that's just 40. That's the ones who can get here, except for Miss Miller delivers some and Mr. Wessels delivers some people who we know can't get out. But 40 families. I don't know how many people live in Norfolk. Anybody know? And how many of them are hungry? Tomorrow night I'm going to the projects in Compostela just after sundown just to see what it's like, because I have an idea about what it's like, and I have an idea that the church ought to respond. So it's our way of doing the gospel and not just saying the gospel. Our friends from Chesapeake came to visit on the 14th of June. We had pledged ourselves to have a serious conversation about race relations. And they had 3 speakers, one, the pastor and his wife, and one young African boy. And each one of them shared the gospel with us. So, well, you know, we kind of made up our minds about this gospel thing. We don't want to have a conversation about the gospel. We want to have a conversation about us, about the way we get along, and the way we can get along, and the way we should get along. That's the conversation we want to have. But it's much easier to say, go be filled and warmed, than it is to bake and break some bread. And so it's a problem with an apparent solution. Use what you have, give it to him, do what he says, and expect to have leftovers. You won't go without because of what you give. You hear me say that all the time in my offertory prayers frequently, so that no one goes wanting because of what they have given. And you won't, if in sincerity and faith you put it in his hands. Well, that's our time. I want to thank you for being present and engaging in this conversation tonight. And I want to thank those of you who've been part of our virtual classroom, our virtual classmates, for joining us once again. We'll meet in our Sunday worship at 11 o'clock Sunday morning, and look forward to the time when we can gather in real life. Most of us, when we gather on Sunday at the address, gather on the parking lot, but a handful come inside, and we'll welcome you any way you come. And if you come back in a virtual way, we'll be glad that you did. In the meantime, God bless you, and you have a very good evening. Good night.